Mirai stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, adjusting her security uniform. 3 weeks had passed since she moved to New Seoul Station, and she was settling into her new assignment. The work was straightforward enough. She protected diplomatic visitors, maintained order during events, and coordinated with other security personnel. For a Draconid warrior, it was almost boring, but something kept catching her attention. Her neighbor, Taiho. She had seen him nearly every day since their first meeting. He always looked the same. Tired, dressed in work clothes, carrying his toolbox or reading his ancient books. He lived a simple life, completely unremarkable. Except it wasn't unremarkable. Not really. Mirai had been trained to observe people. It was part of her job. And the more she observed Taiho, the more questions formed in her mind. First, there was the way he moved. Most people walked without thinking about it, but Taiho moved with a precision that seemed unconscious. His steps were measured. His balance was perfect. When he turned corners, his body shifted in a way that suggested deep physical training. Second, there were his hands. She had noticed them that first day when they picked up his tools together. His hands were covered in scars. Not the small scars that came from working with machinery, but deeper marks that spoke of old injuries. Burned scars on his palms, a long, thin scar across his knuckles. These were the hands of someone who had seen violence. Third, there was the incident with the 3 aliens. Mirai had been returning from training when she saw it happen. She had been ready to intervene, but Taiho had handled it before she could step forward. What struck her was not that he resolved the situation, but how he did it. He never raised his voice. He never made threats. He simply stood there with complete calm, and somehow that was enough to make 3 aggressive aliens back down. That kind of presence didn't come from nowhere. Mirai finished adjusting her uniform and left her apartment. As she walked down the corridor, she saw Taiho leaving his apartment at the same time. He was wearing his work coveralls again. "Good morning," he said with a small smile. "Good morning," she replied. They walked together toward the transport station. It was still early and the corridors were mostly empty. "Another long shift today?" Mirai asked. "Probably. We're doing maintenance on the water recycling system. It's delicate work." He glanced at her. "What about you?" "A delegation from the Vortan Collective arrives this afternoon. I will be on security detail." "Sounds important." "It is routine." They reached the transport station and stood waiting. The silence between them was comfortable. Mirai found that unusual. Most people either talked too much around her or stayed completely silent out of fear. Taiho did neither. He simply existed beside her without tension. The transport arrived and they boarded together. It was more crowded now, with workers heading to their morning shifts. Mirai noticed something interesting. Several humans in the transport nodded respectfully to Taiho as he passed. One older human man actually stepped aside and bowed his head slightly. Taiho acknowledged each person with a simple nod, but he seemed almost uncomfortable with the attention. He moved to a quiet corner of the transport and Mirai followed, curious. "People seem to respect you," she observed. Taiho shrugged. "I've been here 8 months. You get to know people." "It seems like more than that." "Maybe." He didn't elaborate. The transport stopped at Mirai's station first. As she prepared to exit, Taiho spoke again. "Be careful with the Vortan delegation. They can be unpredictable." She looked at him surprised. "You know the Vortans?" "I've dealt with them before. Just be prepared for anything." Then the doors opened and Mirai stepped out. As the transport pulled away, she found herself thinking about that comment. How did a maintenance engineer know about Vortan diplomatic behavior? Later that day, after her security shift, Mirai went to the station's recreational district. There was a bar there that catered to military veterans and security personnel. She went there occasionally to hear news and stay connected with the broader Federation security community. She sat at the bar and ordered a drink. Around her, various aliens talked and laughed. Most were veterans of different conflicts throughout the galaxy. War stories were common currency in places like this. 2 tables away, she heard a conversation that made her stop and listen. "I'm telling you, I saw him," a gravelly voice said. It belonged to a Kralix, a large reptilian species known for their military service. "The silent storm here on this station." "That's impossible," another voice replied. This one belonged to a Vortan, one of the insectoid species from the outer sectors. The silent storm disappeared years ago, after the border wars ended. "I know what I saw," the Kralix insisted. It was during the Border Wars, Colony Hadrian. My unit was part of the assault force. We had 3 full battalions. The colony only had 200 defenders left. It should have been over in hours, and what happened? He happened. One human soldier. He arrived and took position on the northern ridge. For 72 hours he held that position alone. 72 hours. We threw everything at him. Assault teams, artillery support, aerial strikes. Nothing worked. He moved like a ghost. Every shot he took was perfect. Every tactic we tried, he countered. The Vortan made a clicking sound of disbelief. 1 soldier held off 3 battalions? By the time human reinforcements arrived, we had lost 800 soldiers. 800. The colony was saved. 10,000 civilians lived because of him. We called him the Silent Storm because he never spoke, never wasted movement. Just pure efficiency. Why Silent Storm? Because you never heard him coming. And when he struck, it was like a force of nature. Unstoppable. Mireille listened intently. She had heard stories about the border wars. They had happened about 15 years ago, a series of conflicts between the Federation and several aggressive species near human space. Humanity had been new to the Federation then, and many species doubted their military capability. The border wars changed that perception. What happened to him? The Vortan asked. That's the strange part. After the war, humanity gave him their highest military honor. 3 different species offered him command positions. He refused everything. Just disappeared. Rumor says he's somewhere in this sector living like nothing happened. Maybe he died. Maybe. Or maybe he just wanted to be left alone. The conversation shifted to other topics, but Mireille couldn't stop thinking about what she had heard. The Silent Storm, a legendary human warrior who saved an entire colony and then vanished. She wondered if the Kralix veteran was telling the truth or just exaggerating an old story. Veterans often did that, making their war stories bigger with each telling. 3 days later, something happened that made Mireille reconsider everything. It was the middle of the night cycle, and emergency alarms suddenly blared throughout the station. Mireille was in her apartment when it happened. She immediately grabbed her uniform and rushed out into the corridor. The announcement came over the station speakers. Atmospheric leak in Section 7. All personnel evacuate immediately. Emergency response teams report to stations. Section 7 was 3 levels below her current position. Mireille ran toward the nearest emergency access shaft. As a security officer, she was required to respond to all major emergencies. When she reached Section 7, she found chaos. Civilians were panicking, running in different directions. The leak was releasing toxic gases into the air, and the section's emergency doors weren't closing properly. If the leak wasn't sealed soon, the entire section would be uninhabitable. Mireille immediately began directing civilians toward safe evacuation routes. Other security personnel and emergency responders were arriving, but the situation was overwhelming. Then she saw Taiho. He was wearing his work coveralls and carrying his toolbox. He must have been off duty, but he had responded anyway. What surprised Mireille was what happened next. Taiho moved through the chaos with complete calm. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply walked to the control panel near the damaged section and began working. Around him, other engineers were arguing about what to do. The control systems were malfunctioning, and no one could agree on the best approach. Listen, Taiho said, his voice quiet but somehow cutting through the noise. Everyone stopped and looked at him. We need to reroute power to the emergency seals first. Bypass the main control system and activate them manually. Once the seals are active, we can work on the leak itself. That will take too long, one engineer protested. It's the only way that will work, Taiho replied. Trust me. Something in his tone made the other engineers nod and follow his instructions. Within minutes, they had rerouted the power. The emergency seals activated with a heavy thunk containing the toxic gases. The immediate danger was over. Taiho then organized the engineers into teams, each assigned to specific tasks. He directed them with simple, clear instructions. No wasted words. No hesitation. Within 30 minutes, the leak was sealed and the air was being cleaned. Mireille watched all of this from a distance. This was not the behavior of a simple maintenance engineer. This was the behavior of someone who had commanded others in crisis situations, someone who knew exactly what to do when everything was falling apart. After the emergency was resolved, Taiho simply packed up his toolbox and walked away. He didn't wait for thanks or recognition. He just left as if he had just finished another routine shift. Mirai followed him at a distance. When they reached their apartment block, she called out to him. "Taiho." He stopped and turned around. "Yes, that was impressive. What you did down there," he shrugged. "It was just engineering. Anyone with the right training could have done it." "That's not true. You led an entire team through a crisis. Where did you learn to do that?" For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something old and tired. Then it was gone. "I've had some experience with emergencies," he said simply. "Good night, Mirai." He walked to his apartment and went inside. Mirai stood in the corridor, more curious than ever. She thought about the story she had heard at the bar. The Silent Storm. A human warrior who led others through impossible situations and then disappeared. She looked at Taiho's closed door and wondered, could her quiet neighbor be that legendary warrior? It seemed impossible, and yet the more she observed him, the more the pieces seemed to fit. The diplomatic reception hall on New Seoul Station was filled with representatives from a dozen species. Bright lights reflected off polished metal walls, and servers moved through the crowd carrying drinks from various worlds. Mirai stood near the entrance in her formal security uniform, watching everything with trained awareness. The Thalan Dominion delegation had arrived that morning. The Thalans were an aggressive species with a history of territorial expansion. Relations between them and humanity had been tense for years. There had even been a small military conflict at the border just 3 months ago. This diplomatic visit was supposed to ease tensions, but Mirai could feel the hostility in the air. The leader of the Thalan delegation was a warrior named Vortak. He was tall, even by Thalan standards, with dark purple skin covered in ceremonial scars. Each scar represented a battle he had won. There were many scars. Vortak stood in the center of the room, surrounded by other Thalan warriors and some curious aliens. He was speaking loudly, making sure everyone could hear him. "Humans talk about peace," Vortak said, his voice dripping with contempt. "But they talk because they are weak. In the border wars, they were lucky. We will not be so generous next time." Several humans in the room shifted uncomfortably. The station commander, a middle-aged woman named Director Yoon, maintained a diplomatic smile, but Mirai could see the tension in her shoulders. "The border wars are in the past," Director Yoon said calmly. "We are here to build a better future." "Future?" Vortak laughed. "Humans hide behind diplomacy because they cannot fight. Your species is soft. You have no warriors worthy of the name." Mirai felt anger rising in her chest. She had fought beside human soldiers before. They were not soft, but she maintained her professional composure. Her job was security, not diplomacy. "Perhaps you would like a demonstration?" Vortak continued. He looked around the room. "I challenge this station's finest warrior to an honor duel. Let us see what humanity can offer." An honor duel was a Thalan tradition. It was supposed to be non-lethal combat, but injuries were common. Director Yoon looked troubled. Refusing the challenge would be a diplomatic insult, but accepting it could lead to violence and escalate tensions. "We can discuss this through proper channels," Director Yoon began. "Proper channels," Vortak sneered. "More talk. More weakness." At that moment, the door to the reception hall opened. Taiho walked past, heading somewhere else. He was still wearing his work coveralls and carrying a tablet. He must have been on his way to another shift. He barely glanced at the reception as he walked by. Vortak noticed him and laughed loudly. "Look, here is a perfect example. Is this the best humanity offers? A grease-stained laborer." Several Thalans laughed along with their leader. Some aliens in the room looked embarrassed. Taiho stopped walking and turned to look at Vortak. His expression was neutral, showing neither anger nor fear. "I'm just passing through," Taiho said quietly. "Excuse me." "No," Vortak said, stepping toward him. "You are human. You represent your weak species. Look at you, covered in dirt. No warrior pride. No strength. Just a worker who fixes machines." Taiho's eyes met Vortak's. For a moment, Mirai saw something flash in Taiho's expression, something cold and dangerous. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual calm demeanor. "I'm happy fixing machines," Taiho said. "It's honest work?" "Honest work for a weak species," Vortak replied. Then from the back of the room, an old voice spoke. "It cannot be." Everyone turned to look. An elderly Kralik stood up from where he had been sitting. His scales were gray with age, and he wore a military uniform covered in medals. His eyes were wide with shock as he stared at Tahoe. "General Vorth?" Director Yoon said, surprised. The Kralix general was a respected figure in the Federation military. No one had expected him to speak. Vorth walked slowly across the room, his eyes never leaving Tahoe. When he was a few feet away, he stopped. "Commander Kang," Vorth said quietly. "It is you." The room fell completely silent. Even Vortak stopped talking, sensing that something important was happening. Tahoe sighed softly. "That rank doesn't apply anymore, General. I'm just an engineer now." "Commander Kang?" Vortak said, confused. "Who is this?" Vorth turned to face the room. His old voice carried clearly in the silence. "This man is Commander Tahoe Kang. During the border wars, I fought against him. It is an experience I will never forget." Mireille felt her heart beat faster. The silent storm, it was really him. "Tell us," Vortak demanded, some of his arrogance fading. Vorth nodded slowly. "It was 15 years ago. Colony Hadrian. The colony was located near disputed space, and my people decided to claim it. We sent 3 battalions, over 3,000 soldiers. The colony only had 200 defenders remaining. We expected to take it within a day." He paused, remembering. Then Commander Kang arrived. He was alone. 1 soldier. He took position on the northern ridge overlooking the colony. For 72 hours he held that position by himself. "1 soldier?" someone in the crowd whispered. "1 soldier," Vorth confirmed. "We threw everything at him. Infantry assaults, artillery bombardment, aerial strikes. Nothing worked. He moved like smoke. Every shot he took was precise. Every time we thought we had him, he was somewhere else. We started calling him the Silent Storm." Tahoe stood motionless, looking uncomfortable with the attention, but he didn't try to leave. "How many did he kill?" Vortak asked, his voice quieter now. "By the time human reinforcements arrived, we had lost 800 soldiers. 800 warriors against 1 human. The colony was saved. 10,000 civilians survived because of him." Vorth turned back to Tahoe. "After the war, I learned more about you. You received humanity's highest military honor, the Star of Valor. 3 different species offered you supreme command positions. You refused them all. You simply disappeared." "I retired," Tahoe said simply. "The war was over. I wanted to build things instead of destroying them." Director Yoon stared at Tahoe with wide eyes. "You're Commander Kang?" "The Commander Kang? I was. Now I'm just Tahoe, an engineer who fixes atmospheric processors." Mireille felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. For weeks she had lived next door to one of the most legendary warriors in recent Federation history, the humble man who read ancient books and worked long shifts, the quiet neighbor who helped her pick up dropped tools. Vortak looked at Tahoe with new eyes. The mockery was gone, replaced by something resembling respect. In warrior cultures like the Thalans, reputation mattered, and Tahoe's reputation was immense. "Why did you leave?" Vortak asked. It was a genuine question, not a challenge. Tahoe was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice soft but clear. "Because I proved I could fight. I proved that humanity could stand against anyone. But fighting is easy. Anyone can learn to destroy. Building peace is harder. That's what I want to do now." "You think rejecting warrior culture makes you noble?" Vortak asked. "I think," Tahoe replied, "that every species has different values. Thalans value strength in battle. Draconids value honor in combat. Humans value choice. We respect warriors, but we also respect those who choose peace. Both paths take courage." Mireille felt her breath catch. In Draconid culture, warriors who turned away from combat were often seen as cowards. But looking at Tahoe, she saw no cowardice, only a tired man who had seen too much violence and chose a different path. She stepped forward, her decision made. In front of the entire diplomatic gathering, she performed a deep formal bow. This was the highest honor a Draconid could give. It was reserved only for warriors who had proven themselves in the most extreme circumstances. The other Draconids in the room immediately understood the significance. 2 other Draconid security officers followed her lead, bowing deeply. Even Vortak, after a moment of hesitation, bowed his head in respect. In Thalan culture, a warrior who had proven themselves so completely deserved acknowledgement. Tahoe looked around the room at all the people, showing him respect. He seemed more uncomfortable now than when Vortak had been mocking him. "I appreciate the gesture," he said quietly, "but that life is behind me. I'm happier fixing air processors than fighting wars." Now if you'll excuse me, I have a maintenance shift starting soon. He nodded politely to everyone and walked toward the exit. Director Yoon looked like she wanted to say something, but she let him go. The room remained silent as he left. After the door closed, Vortex spoke. I came here thinking humans were weak. I was wrong, Forth nodded. That is the thing about humans. They seem ordinary. They wear simple clothes. They do simple work. But when necessary, they become something else entirely. That is why they are dangerous. You never know which ordinary human might be extraordinary. Mirai stood frozen, replaying every interaction she had with Taiho, the way he moved, the scars on his hands, his calm during the emergency, the respect other humans showed him. All the signs had been there, but she had been too blind to see them. She had treated him with mild condescension, the way draconids often treated younger species. She had assumed he was just a simple worker. She felt ashamed of her initial attitude toward him. After the reception ended, Mirai returned to her apartment. She stood outside Taiho's door for a long moment, trying to decide whether to knock. What would she even say? In the end, she went to her own apartment. But sleep didn't come easily that night. She kept thinking about the quiet man next door, the legendary warrior who chose to fix machines instead of leading armies. The next morning, she saw him in the corridor. He was leaving for work again, carrying his toolbox. Good morning, he said, just like always. Good morning, she replied. He started to walk past, but she found herself speaking. Why didn't you tell me? About who you are? He stopped and turned to look at her. Because that's not who I am anymore. I'm just an engineer. Just your neighbor. The rest is history. But the things you did were necessary at the time. But they don't define me now. I define me. He gave her a small smile. I'd rather be known as the guy who keeps the air working than the guy who killed 800 soldiers. Wouldn't you? Mirai thought about that. In her culture, being known as a great warrior was the highest achievement. But maybe Taiho had a point. Maybe there was more than one way to measure a person's worth. I understand, she said quietly. Good. He adjusted his grip on his toolbox. I have to get to work. Have a good day, Mirai. You too, Taiho. She watched him walk away, this legendary warrior in work coveralls. And she realized something. He had already achieved what most warriors spent their whole lives seeking. He had nothing left to prove. That was real strength. The story spread through New Seoul Station like fire through dry grass. Within 2 days, everyone knew that the quiet maintenance engineer in Block 7 was actually Commander Taiho Kang, the legendary silent storm from the border wars. Taiho hated it. People stopped him in corridors to thank him. They asked for pictures. They wanted to hear war stories. Some young humans asked if he would train them. Station security offered him a high-ranking position. The director wanted to give him medals and recognition. He refused everything politely and tried to continue his normal routine. But normal was gone. Mirai watched this happen from a distance. She saw how uncomfortable Taiho became whenever someone recognized him. She saw how he started taking longer routes to avoid crowded areas. She saw the tiredness in his eyes grow deeper. She felt responsible. If she hadn't bowed to him at the reception, maybe his identity would have remained secret. Maybe he could have continued his quiet life. 1 week after the reception, Mirai decided she needed to apologize. She waited in the corridor until she heard his door open. He was leaving for work, carrying his toolbox as always. Taiho, she called out. He turned and gave her a tired smile. Good morning, Mirai. Can we talk? Just for a moment? He glanced at his watch, then nodded. I have a few minutes. They walked together to the communal garden. It was early morning and the garden was empty. The artificial sunlight was just beginning to brighten, and the sound of the waterfall was peaceful. They sat on the same bench where they had talked before. For a moment, neither of them spoke. I'm sorry, Mirai finally said. Taiho looked at her with surprise. Sorry for what? For bowing to you at the reception. I revealed your identity to everyone. I know you wanted to keep your past private. He was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. You don't need to apologize. You acted according to your culture's values. In Draconid tradition, you were showing respect to a proven warrior. That's honorable. But it made your life difficult. Yes, he admitted. But that's not your fault. General Vorth would have told everyone anyway. You just accelerated the process. Still, I should have thought about what you wanted. Maybe. He leaned back on the bench and looked up at the artificial sky. But honestly, I'm tired of hiding. I thought I could just disappear and become someone new. But the past doesn't disappear. It follows you. Miri studied his face. He looked older than his years, weighed down by memories she couldn't imagine. Why did you really leave the military? She asked. General Vorth said you refused command positions from 3 different species. That's incredible honor. Tejo was silent for a long time. Miri thought he might not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice soft. At Colony Hadrian, I held that ridge for 72 hours. Everyone talks about the 800 soldiers I killed, but no one talks about the 73. 73? Colonists. Civilians who died while I was protecting them. I couldn't save them all. A mother and her 2 children were killed by artillery fire that I couldn't prevent. An old man died from injuries before medical help arrived. A young couple was caught in crossfire. He closed his eyes. I see their faces more clearly than the soldiers I killed. Miri felt her chest tighten. You saved 10,000 people. I know. Everyone tells me that. And I'm grateful that so many survived. But the 73 haunt me. Every warrior choice I made, every tactical decision, resulted in someone living or dying. That weight became too much. So you became an engineer. So I became an engineer, he confirmed. When I fix an atmospheric processor, no one dies if I make a mistake. Well, not usually. The stakes are different. I can build things instead of destroying them. I can help people without killing others. He opened his eyes and looked at her. Does that make sense? Yes, Miri said quietly. It makes perfect sense. They sat in silence for a while. Miri found herself thinking about her own military career. She had been a decorated warrior, praised for her combat skills. But recently she had started to feel empty. Fighting was all she knew, but she wasn't sure it was all she wanted to be. Can I tell you something? Miri asked. Of course. In Draconid culture, being a warrior is the highest calling. From childhood, we're trained to fight. My parents were both military commanders. My siblings are all active soldiers. I've won tournaments and served in 3 conflicts. You should be proud of that. I am. Or I was. She looked down at her hands. But lately I've felt tired. Not physically tired. Tired in my spirit. Every conflict starts to feel the same. Every victory feels hollow. I requested this security position because I wanted something different. But my family sees it as weakness. It's not weakness, Tejo said firmly. Recognizing that you need a change requires strength. Following the same path forever just because others expect it is easier than choosing your own direction. My people wouldn't agree. They would say I'm abandoning my warrior heritage. Your people value combat and honor, Tejo said. Humans value choice. We believe that true strength comes from choosing your own path, even if others don't understand it. Different cultures, different values. Both have merit. How do you balance it? Miri asked. How do you accept your warrior past while living a different life now? Tejo thought about that. I don't reject what I was. I was a soldier. I did what was necessary to protect people, but I also don't let that define everything I am. The past is part of me, but it's not all of me. I'm also someone who likes reading old books, someone who finds satisfaction in fixing broken systems, someone who prefers quiet evenings to loud celebrations. He smiled slightly. I learned something from Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher I was reading. He was a warrior emperor who spent years fighting wars, but he wrote about how the goal isn't to avoid challenges, but to maintain your principles through them. He was both warrior and philosopher, both strong and thoughtful. Humans understand that people can be many things at once. Miri felt something shift in her understanding. She had always thought in absolute terms, warrior or civilian, strong or weak, but maybe life was more complex than that. Thank you, she said. For what? For sharing your wisdom, for being honest about your struggles. We're neighbors, he said with a slight smile, and maybe friends. Friends help each other understand things. Yes, Miri agreed. Friends. They sat together as the garden brightened with artificial morning light. For the first time since arriving at the station, Miri felt like she had found someone who understood her doubts and questions. Over the following weeks, Tejo and Miri spent more time together. They would meet in the garden and talk about everything: philosophy, culture, their pasts and their hopes for the future. Tejo shared stories about human history and the lessons he had learned. Mireille told him about Draconid traditions and her growing uncertainty about her path. The station's attention on Tejo gradually faded. People still recognized him, but they started to respect his desire for privacy. He returned to his normal routines, though he accepted a small promotion that gave him more interesting engineering projects. One evening, they were having tea in Mireille's apartment. She had learned to make human tea, and Tejo had brought some traditional Korean tea leaves from the station market. "I've been thinking," Mireille said as she poured tea, "about what you said about choice and strength. And I've decided to stay in security, but to focus on protection and prevention rather than combat. I want to help build peaceful systems rather than just reacting to conflicts. That sounds like a good path. My family won't understand. They'll say I'm wasting my warrior training." "Maybe," Tejo said, "but you're not living your life for your family. You're living it for yourself. Their opinions matter, but your own fulfillment matters more." Mireille nodded. "You're right. It's still frightening, though. Choosing a different path than everyone expects. Of course it is. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear." He sipped his tea. "Besides, you're not abandoning your warrior nature. You're just expressing it differently. Protecting people is still a warrior's calling. You're just doing it with wisdom instead of only with strength." "Is that what you do? Protect people by keeping their systems working?" "Exactly. If the atmospheric processors fail, thousands die. If the water recycling breaks down, the station becomes uninhabitable. I protect people every day. I just do it with tools instead of weapons." Mireille felt a warmth in her chest. This conversation, this friendship was exactly what she needed. Tejo understood her in a way that few others could. Both of them were warriors learning to be something more. "Tell me more about Marcus Aurelius," she said. "The warrior philosopher you're always reading." Tejo smiled and began to explain. They talked late into the evening, two warriors finding wisdom in ancient words and new friendship. Outside, the station hummed with life, thousands of beings from dozens of species going about their lives. Among them, in a small apartment in Block 7, a legendary human warrior and a Draconid soldier talked about peace and purpose. They were both learning that true strength wasn't just in fighting. It was in choosing what to fight for, and knowing when to put down the sword and pick up something else. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden alert on Mireille's communicator. She checked it and frowned. "What's wrong?" Tejo asked. "Security notice. The Thalan delegation is having some kind of emergency meeting. All senior security personnel are being put on alert." "Vortak?" "Yes, something about new developments from their homeworld." She stood up. "I need to check in with the security office." "Be careful," Tejo said. "Thalan's under pressure can be unpredictable." "I will." She paused at the door. "Thank you for tonight. For everything." "Any time, friend." After she left, Tejo sat alone in her apartment for a moment, finishing his tea. Something felt wrong. He couldn't explain it, but his instincts were warning him. Years of combat experience had taught him to trust those instincts. He stood up and walked back to his own apartment. Maybe he was being paranoid. Maybe the Thalan emergency was nothing important. But deep down he suspected that the quiet peace he had built was about to be tested. Tejo was checking the reactor monitoring systems when he noticed something wrong. It was subtle. Just a small inconsistency in the safety protocol logs. Most engineers would have missed it. But Tejo had learned long ago that small details often revealed big problems. He pulled up the detailed logs and started analyzing them. His hands moved quickly across the keyboard, pulling up system after system. The more he looked, the worse it got. Someone had inserted hidden code into the reactor safety protocols. The code was designed to trigger a cascade failure that would make the reactor core melt down. When that happened, the explosion would destroy a large section of the station. Thousands of people would die. Tejo checked the timer embedded in the code. 4 hours. In 4 hours, the code would activate and there would be no stopping it. He immediately contacted station security. Director Yoon answered within seconds. "Director, we have a major problem," Tejo said calmly. "Someone has sabotaged the reactor core. We have approximately 4 hours before catastrophic failure." There was silence on the line. Then Director Yoon spoke, her voice tight. "Are you certain?" "Completely certain. I'm sending you the data now. Who could have done this?" "I don't know yet. But the code is sophisticated. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. Can you stop it? Tejo studied the code more carefully. Yes, but I'll need direct access to the reactor core itself. The sabotage is too deep in the system to fix remotely. Do it. I'll send security to assist you and start investigating who's responsible. Tejo grabbed his emergency equipment kit and headed toward the reactor level. As he walked, he thought about the timing. The Thalan delegation was still on the station. Vortak had been angry and humiliated after the reception. Could this be revenge? He pushed the thought aside. Right now, finding the saboteur didn't matter. Stopping the meltdown did. When he reached the reactor level, he found Mirai already there. She was standing at the entrance to the restricted area, looking worried. Director Yoon told me, she said. I'm here to help. It's going to be dangerous, Tejo warned. I know. That's why I'm here. They entered the restricted area together. The reactor core was housed in a massive chamber at the center of the station. It provided power for everything. Life support, gravity, communications, everything. If it failed, the station died with it. Tejo accessed the security door and they entered the outer chamber. Immediately, radiation alarms began beeping. The levels were still safe, but they were higher than normal. The sabotage had already started affecting the reactor stability. We need to get to the main control terminal inside the reactor chamber, Tejo explained. The sabotage code is locked to that terminal. I have to physically access it to override the commands. Mirai looked at the radiation readings. If we go in there, how long do we have? With standard protective suits, about 30 minutes before radiation exposure becomes fatal. The work will take at least 45 minutes. That's suicide. Yes, Tejo said simply. He began putting on a protective suit. But if I don't do it, 50,000 people die. I'd rather one person die than 50,000. Mirai grabbed his arm. There has to be another way. There isn't. I've checked every option. This is the only way. He looked at her calmly. I've made peace with death before. I can do it again. Mirai stared at him for a long moment. Then she started putting on her own protective suit. What are you doing? Tejo asked. Coming with you. Draconids have higher resistance to radiation than humans. Together we might both survive long enough to finish the work. Mirai, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to. You taught me that choice is strength, remember? She sealed her helmet. Besides, you'll work faster with help. And two of us can double-check each other's work. No mistakes. Tejo wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. With her help, they had a better chance of completing the work before the radiation killed them. And a better chance meant more certainty that the station would be saved. Thank you, he said quietly. Thank me when we're both alive and this is over. They entered the reactor chamber together. The inside of the chamber was a maze of machinery and conduits. The reactor core itself was a massive sphere suspended in the center, glowing with blue light. The temperature was intense and the radiation alarms were screaming warnings. Tejo led the way to the main control terminal. It was positioned on a platform directly beside the reactor core, the most dangerous location in the entire chamber. They reached the terminal, and Tejo began working immediately. His fingers flew across the keyboard, analyzing the sabotage code and writing counter-programs to disable it. Mirai stood beside him, reading out radiation levels and helping him navigate the complex code structure. They worked in perfect coordination like a machine with two parts. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Radiation levels are entering critical range, Mirai reported. Her voice was steady, but Tejo could hear the strain in it. I know. Keep going. At 35 minutes, Tejo started feeling the effects. His hands were shaking slightly. His vision was beginning to blur at the edges. The radiation was breaking down his cells faster than his body could repair them. I've disabled the primary trigger, he said, but there are backup systems. The saboteur was thorough. How many backups? 3 more. We need to disable all of them or the reactor will still melt down. They kept working. 40 minutes. 45 minutes. At 48 minutes, Tejo collapsed. He fell to his knees, his body refusing to obey his commands. The radiation exposure was too much. His human physiology was failing. Tejo. Mirai caught him before he fell completely. The terminal, he gasped. 3 more lines of code. Lines 473, 682, and 915. Delete them. Mirai wanted to drag him out of the chamber, but she knew they didn't have time. If she stopped now, all of this would be for nothing. She gently lowered him to the platform and turned back to the terminal. Her own body was suffering. Draconids were more resistant to radiation than humans, but she was still dying. Her scales were losing their iridescent quality, turning dull and gray. Her vision was narrowing, but she focused on the terminal. Line 473. Found it, deleted. Line 682. Found it, deleted. Line 915. Found it, deleted. The reactor monitoring system flashed green. The cascade failure was stopped. The reactor was stable. They had done it. Mirai collapsed beside Taiho. She reached out and took his hand. If they were going to die, at least they had saved everyone else. "We did it," she whispered. "Good," Taiho whispered back. "Thank you, friend." Then emergency teams burst into the chamber. They had been waiting outside in protective gear, ready to extract Taiho and Mirai the moment the reactor stabilized. Medical personnel rushed forward with advanced radiation treatment equipment. They loaded both Taiho and Mirai onto emergency stretchers and rushed them to the medical bay. The next few days were a blur of medical procedures and pain. The doctors used every advanced treatment the Federation had available: cellular regeneration, genetic repair, artificial blood transfusions, radiation cleansing. It took 2 weeks, but both Taiho and Mirai survived. The doctors said they were incredibly lucky. A few more minutes of exposure and nothing could have saved them. During their recovery, the investigation revealed the truth. Vortak and 3 of his delegation members had planned the sabotage. They wanted to destroy the station and blame humanity, using it as justification for a larger war. But station security had found evidence in their quarters: communication logs, technical specifications, everything needed to prove their guilt. The Thalan government, faced with undeniable proof, issued a formal apology. Vortak and his conspirators were arrested and faced trial for attempted mass murder. The diplomatic incident could have started a war. Instead, it ended one before it began. 3 weeks after the incident, Taiho and Mirai were both released from medical care. They were weak and would need months of continued treatment, but they would make full recoveries. The Galactic Federation held a ceremony to honor them. Representatives from dozens of species attended. Director Yoon gave a speech about their sacrifice and courage. When it was time to present the awards, both Taiho and Mirai walked slowly onto the stage. They were still recovering, but they could stand on their own. "For your actions in preventing a catastrophic disaster and saving 50,000 lives," the Federation ambassador said, "we award you both the Star of Valor, the Federation's highest honor for heroism." The audience erupted in applause. Taiho and Mirai accepted their medals with quiet dignity. When asked to speak, Taiho kept his words simple. "We did what anyone would do. We protected our home and our neighbors. That's not heroism. That's just basic decency." Mirai added, "And we did it together. No single person saved the station. We helped each other. That's the real lesson." The ceremony ended with more applause, but both Taiho and Mirai were relieved when it was over. They had never wanted glory or recognition. They just wanted to live their lives in peace. 2 months later, both of them had returned to their normal routines. Taiho was back to fixing atmospheric processors and other station systems. Mirai was back to her security work, focusing on prevention and protection rather than combat. They still met regularly in the communal garden to talk and share tea. Their friendship had deepened through their shared experience. They understood each other in a way that few others could. One evening, they sat together watching the artificial sunset in the garden. The light shifted from bright white to warm orange, simulating an Earth sunset. "Do you ever think about going back?" Mirai asked. "To the military life?" "No," Taiho said firmly. "I proved twice now that I can fight when necessary, but I don't want to live that life. I'm happy being an engineer. Even though people still see you as a warrior, they can see me however they want. I know who I am." He smiled at her. "What about you? Still happy with security work?" "Yes, more than ever, actually. I'm developing new safety protocols for the station, prevention systems that can detect sabotage before it becomes dangerous. It's satisfying work. Building instead of destroying." "Exactly." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Mirai spoke again. "Thank you, Taiho, for showing me that there's more than one way to be strong. For teaching me that choosing peace doesn't make you weak." "You didn't need me to teach you that," Taiho replied. "You already knew it. You just needed permission to believe it. Maybe, but you gave me that permission, and you showed me what it looks like to live with purpose beyond combat." Taiho looked at the artificial sunset and thought about the path that had led him here. The wars he had fought, the lives he had taken and saved, the choice to walk away from military glory and become an engineer, the friendship he had found with Mireille, the final test in the reactor chamber. All of it had brought him to this moment, sitting in a peaceful garden with a friend, watching a fake sunset, and feeling more content than he had in years. "You know what I've learned?" he said. "Humanity's real strength isn't in our ability to fight. It's in our ability to choose. We can be warriors when needed, but we can also be builders, teachers, friends. We adapt, we change, we grow. That's what makes us strong." "Other species value strength in combat," Mireille observed, "and we respect that. But we also value other kinds of strength. The strength to forgive, the strength to change direction, the strength to choose peace even when you could choose war. Every species has different values, and that's okay. Diversity makes the Federation stronger." Mireille smiled. "You sound like a philosopher." "I've been reading a lot of Marcus Aurelius lately," he admitted. "It's rubbing off on me." They laughed together, and the sound was warm and genuine. As the artificial sun set completely and the garden lights came on, simulating starlight, Taiho felt at peace. He had been a soldier, a warrior, a legend, but now he was something more important. He was himself, just Taiho, an engineer who fixed atmospheric processors and read ancient books and had a good friend to share tea with. That was enough. That was more than enough. Beside him, Mireille felt the same peace. She had been raised to be a warrior, trained to fight and conquer. But now she understood that there were many ways to protect people, many ways to be strong, many ways to live a meaningful life. She had learned that from her neighbor, her friend, a legendary human warrior who chose to become an ordinary engineer, and in making that choice, proved that he was extraordinary in ways that combat could never measure. They sat together under the artificial stars, two warriors who had learned that the greatest victory was choosing what to fight for. And sometimes the greatest strength was choosing not to fight at all. The station hummed around them, alive with 50,000 souls going about their lives. Lives that continued because two people had chosen to sacrifice themselves to save others. But neither Taiho nor Mireille thought of themselves as heroes. They were just neighbors, just friends, just two people who did what needed to be done. And that, in the end, was the most human thing of all.